Great. Thank you, Lisa. Well, welcome everyone to our CoSA-NARA webinar. I'm Jamie Awalt. I'm the Assistant State Archivist at the Tennessee State Library and Archives in Nashville, Tennessee, and the current almost outgoing president for the Council of State Archivists. So welcome everybody. It's good to see everyone. Glad to have you here. Just a brief go over, well, actually, I'd like to introduce Meg Phillips first from the National Archives to welcome as well. Meg.
Thank you, Jamie. Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the National Archives, I'm Meg Phillips. I'm the External Affairs Liaison for the National Archives and Records Administration, and I am available at any time to any of you. I'll drop my email address in chat if you have an idea or need a connection at the National Archives. So we really, really value our connections with the state archives. And these webinars are a tool for getting staff who work in similar areas in state and federal levels together, so people know each other and can consult. So we're really delighted to bring in a team from our agency services office to talk to you about records management, oversight, and reporting. So thank you very much for inviting us to collaborate.
Great, thank you, Meg. So I'll go over the webinar agenda just a little bit. So as Meg said, we're going to talk with, have presentations first from our colleagues in NARA talking about the records management oversight from NARA. And then we will hear from two CoSA members who will go through their stories from the District of Columbia and from the Alabama Department of Archives and History. We'll have a panel discussion and some Q&A. There'll be lots of time for folks to ask questions. You can do so in the chat, and I'll monitor the chat and read those out. So please feel free to speak up. And then afterwards, Lisa will rejoin us and give us some information on upcoming webinars and programs that we have on the books. So first, I'll start with our presenters from the National Archives. We have Donald Rosen, Evangela Wimbush-Jeffrey, and Karen Skavakis. Donald Rosen is the Director of the Director of Records Management, Oversight, and Reporting at the National Archives and Records Administration. In this position, he leads multiple teams in providing records management oversight to federal agencies. Prior to this position, he served as the Director of Policy, Analysis, and Enforcement within the same office where he was responsible for the development of electronic records management policies and guidance. Prior to joining NARA in 2008, Don spent 15 years in the private sector, working with both federal and commercial clients on a variety of records and information management engagements. Evangela Wimbush-Jeffrey has served as the Supervisory Archives Specialist in Records Management Oversight and Reporting for nearly 9 years. She leads a team that is responsible for conducting inspections, assessments, and managing cases of unauthorized disposition of federal records. Prior to this position, she served at the Department of Treasury as the Director of Records and Information Management and as a Program and Business Relationship Manager. And then rounding out our group from NARA is Karen Skavakis. Karen has served as the Supervisory Archives Specialist in Records Management Oversight and Reporting for 4 months. She leads a team that is responsible for conducting inspections, assessments, and conducting the annual reporting cycle for federal agencies. Prior to this position, she was an archives specialist in records management oversight and reporting for over 6 years. And before joining oversight and reporting, she worked as a records management specialist at the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency for almost 10 years. Next, from our state archives, our colleagues are Lopez Matthews and Becky Hebert. Lopez is the state archivist and public records administrator for the District of Columbia. In this capacity, he serves as historian of the District of Columbia, chair of the DC Historical Records Advisory Board, and director of the DC Office of Public Records and Archives. A native of Baltimore, Maryland, he earned a BS in history from Coppin State University in 2004. He then earned a master's degree in public history and archival administration from Howard University in 2006 and a PhD in United States history from Howard University in 2009. Currently, Lopez is a member of the Council of State Archivists and an executive council member of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. He's published several articles and is the author of Howard University in the World Wars, Men and Women Serving the Nation. He's host of In Retrospect and Prospect, where he interviews practitioners about African American history projects for ASALH TV. In 2020, he became a senior advisor for the U.S. Truth, Healing, and Transformation Leadership Group. And in 2023, he was appointed the Secretary of the Interior to the Mary McLeod Bethune Council House National Historic Site Advisory Commission. Rebecca Hebert holds an MA in Public History from the University of West Georgia, with 25 years of records management and archival experience working in universities, nonprofits, and local and state government. During that time, she's completed certificate programs in records management and archival certification. She worked in Georgia for over a decade to collaboratively, build the county's records management program, and more recently served as project director for a 3-year grant from the National Historical Publications and Records Commission, focusing on electronic records management and preservation for the Alabama Archives. Rebecca now manages the Alabama Department of Archives and History's State and Local Records Management Program. She coordinates the activities of the State and Local Records Commission and the State Historical Records Advisory Board, oversees the State Records Center, and assists state and local governments in managing their records. So we have a great slate of speakers. So thank you all for joining us and agreeing to participate. And we'll just we'll get started with Donald Rosen.
Okay, thank you. I think we now have control. We're not have the slides.
You should have control.
Okay, let's see where I can go ahead and advance to the next slide yet. There it is. All right. Well, thanks everyone. We're happy to be here and talk about what we do at NARA, and we are in the Office of the Chief Records Officer. So we have 3 teams that comprised of records management professionals and IT professionals. And our goal is to help agencies, help them improve their records management program. That's our goal for Oversight. We're not gotcha, we're not records police. We're really trying to help agencies, and through our inspections, our evaluations, and we try to identify risks, but we also try to highlight best practices. So our whole goal is to help agencies improve records management. So we go into an agency, we're looking for ways we can help. We also look for where we can make improvements and help them drive towards that through plans of corrective action. And our goal is to try to work with 10% of agencies each year. So that's about potentially almost 30 agencies a year. So some of the tools that we use to do that: we do inspections, almost like we're auditors or OIG, where we go in and we look at their programs and we'll put them on a plan of corrective action. We call assessments, where we kind of look at a topic, but a little less formally. We collect a lot of data through our annual reporting process. We get data from almost 300 agencies, all about the records management program. We use that data to help us in making a lot of our oversight decisions. We do system audits, where we kind of lift the hood of the record systems and see how they're managed. We have a team of IT professionals that help us with that. And we also do, we call it authorized disposition tracking, which is a program that Evangel leads, where agencies report if there's unauthorized disposition. We set up a case management process for that. So some of the tools that we use at our disposal. Let's go back one. Sorry. It looks like we need to go back a couple slides. Sorry. So our authorities, these are some of the authorities that govern our work. We do have the right to go and inspect agencies. The Archives of the United States has that authority to do that. So we exercise that authority when we work with agencies. We have a formal letter to kick off the process. We'll have a kickoff meeting with the agency, and we'll explain what our process is and how we're going to go about our engagement with the agency. And this is just some of the regulations that govern that process. A little bit more about some of the products that we use. I mentioned that we do inspections, and that's a more formal approach. where we look at their complete program. We'll make findings and recommendations, and we'll put on a plan of corrective action at the end, and they have to work towards completing the items that we found. Assessments, again, is a little bit more lighter and more informal. We might work with multiple agencies. Some recent topics we've done an assessment on social media records. We did one on portable electronic devices. We did one recently. We looked at chief data officers and the connection between records management. In terms of our system audits, which is actually our newest function, again, this is where I kind of describes we kind of lift the hood and how are agencies managing the records within those systems. We recently finished one on databases where we wanted to understand the internal controls and how they're managing the records within those databases. We're about to kick off one on text messages and chat. And we recently completed one on collaboration tools. So we'll look at various different topics, kind of what's animating things right now. Like, for example, we do have one planned on artificial intelligence to do an assessment on that because we know that's an important topic in the community right now. So when we go in and do an inspection, what are we looking at? What's our selection criteria? How do we determine what agencies to look at? We capture a lot of data. So we look at the annual reporting data that we get. What are our records management self-assessment scores telling us? Is there media issues or something going on in the news that's going to make us want to go look at that agency? And it might just be a particular topic. We know that they have some high value, high interest permanent records. So lots of different reasons why, but also because we do inspect 10% a year, eventually we're going to get to everybody. So we're also looking at that too. And we'll also get input from other members of our staff. And sometimes agencies themselves will come to us and say, hey, we want to be part of an inspection. Can you come into our program and make findings and recommendations for us? Because that'll help us improve their records management program. And in some cases, we'll add that to our annual work plan, and we'll try to do that as well. So kind of what we look at, I'm going to turn it over to Karen to talk about some of her experiences when she goes in and looks at the inspections. So Karen.
Hi, everyone. So what do we look at? We always start an inspection off with a data call. We're asking agencies for any policies, directives, standard operating procedures. We ask for copies of their training program. We ask for file plans, records retention schedules, any evaluation programs they have. So if they conduct their own evaluations of their records management program, we ask about what outreach they conduct. We ask about what awareness they conduct. So before we even walk in, we have an idea of what the agency is currently doing in order to enhance their records management program. So the focus when we look at records program and schedule implementation, we ask questions about access and retrieval. What storage areas are you utilizing? The focus primarily up until now has been on paper, up until the past couple of years actually has been on paper, but increasingly we started shifting our focus to electronic systems. So we can ask questions about what electronic systems they're using. We ask questions to ensure that the contracts that they've implemented with vendors to manage those systems include language that is records management language per se, that we own, the federal government owns the rights to the records, that we can access them at any time. We're making sure the records are retained. We're asking about unscheduled records. Do you have any? We talk about the relationship with IT. One of the biggest things we find is we ask about whether or not that records management is included in their information resource management plans or their IRMs, which is a requirement. We ask if they're part of the system development lifecycle. We try to figure out where RM fits into that process and making sure that they have a presence. We focus on email, electronic records management, text messaging. Instant messaging has become increasingly of a higher level topic, a bigger topic. We've started addressing how agencies are dealing with third-party messaging apps. Do they allow them? Do they not allow them? What are they permitting on their mobile devices? Any specific issues we're aware of or initiatives in progress we talk about. So when we're going in, we're looking at this broad scope for most inspections. There are some inspections that are targeted in nature. So if we're asking about, we have done ones on disaster recovery. and those focused on their disaster relief plans, how they handled essential records. So your scope is much narrower. But when we're doing a single agency inspection, or we're looking at the broader scope of a department as a whole, doing a coordination series, we're looking at A to Z records management, everything that they're doing and how well they're doing it, focusing primarily again on how communication comes out from the agency. I don't think I have access to the slide deck. Can someone advance it for me, please?
Yeah.
Thank you, Don. Okay, so what we find most often, a lot of times we're finding a lack of basic fundamentals for a compliant and functional records management program. So what do we mean by that? Do they have all their records scheduled? Are they reviewing their records on a regular basis? Basically taking it back to records management 101, ensuring that all your records are scheduled, that they all have their approved record schedules, and you're disposing of the records at the end of their records retention cycle. We also find out that records management staff are not always included in agency specialized processes. One of the findings we've had quite often is that records management staff was not included in the SDLC process. I spoke last slide about the IRM, where they're not included in their IT program, in that they're not fitting into when the agency determines how to move forward with electronic records keeping systems. So they may build a system, but they're not necessarily including records management. They're viewing it as, this is just data. It's not, it's still records and information. They often lack clear performance and or strategic plans. So again, they're not really have the ability, they don't really have the ability to establish what their goals are. They sometimes fit under a broader IT context, and they're not very records management specific. Policies, procedures, and retention schedules are often outdated. I don't want to say often. Policies and procedures are usually updated with some regularity. The schedules, however, are typically outdated. And again, we have a requirement that every 10 years, they have to review their records retention schedules to ensure that they are up to date and accurate. And that has been an increased finding. We're finding that records management, they may have a good schedule. It may work great for them, but they still have to come up with a process in order to ensure that they're meeting the regulatory requirement that they're evaluating their schedules every 10 years. And again, paper business process made in place for a variety of reasons. A lot of times it's because of resource constraints. Some bigger agencies have an abundance of resources to tackle the paper problem, whereas the smaller agencies have to rely on a lot more limited resources and a lot fewer employees to get the job done. So we're trying to help them get from the paper to the electronic. And unfortunately, COVID helped accelerate that to a degree. And I think that's pretty much it for me. So I turn it back over to Don.
Okay, and just some additional information we wanted to share. Our inspection reports are available online, and we do that for a couple of reasons. One is that we want everyone to kind of benefit from it, because we don't have the resources to inspect every agency. So a lot of times what we're finding in these inspections can benefit other agencies as well. So we'll post our reports for that benefit. So whether it was things and risks, or is it best practices, folks can see those in the reports. And the same with our assessment reports; those are all available online. We have links to all of our annual reporting data that we capture every year. That's all available as well. So a lot of the data that we capture, we analyze it and we post it every year. So just some more information that's available to everyone. And finally, if anyone has any questions, this is how to reach out to us, and we're happy to obviously answer questions today. But if there are things that come up later offline, we're happy to engage with you as well. And thank you for allowing us to be here. I'll turn it back over.
Don, before we leave the NARA segment, there's a question in chat about whether you can share the self-assessment. And I'm guessing that the question is about the tool. Is the tool included in any of the products that you've provided?
Yeah, the questionnaire is available that we use. I believe we post that online, or that's in one of our reports. Not the actual individual agency scores, but the tool that we do, the records management self-assessment, which is a questionnaire, but I think it's 100 questions that we ask agencies, and that is normal. We've had that in our report itself. And Karen's team manages that process. Karen, Anything else you want to add?
Yes, I was actually going to say we do post every year. We post the questionnaires and templates that we're going to be asking agencies. Typically, the cycle runs from January to mid-March. Sometimes there's an extension in the process. And but every year in January, we will update the questionnaires on our website. So you'll see the completed questionnaires towards the bottom of our reporting page, the RMSA and the federal email management and electronic records report. They're combined into one big report, but the SAORM reports have their own website, and those are posted by year by agency.
And I believe the maturity model tool is also available on our webpage as well. And that's, we set up where agencies can evaluate how they're doing in managing email, using a maturity model approach from a 0 to 4. And that question, you can actually take that and modify it to meet your.
That's absolutely correct. All that information is public.
Anything else in the chat we can answer? Okay, thank you.
Thought I was gonna start. All right, well, hello everybody. My name is Lopez Matthews Jr., and I am the State Archivist and Public Records Administrator for Washington, D.C. Glad to be here with you guys to talk about how we manage our public records in the great city, hopefully soon to be state of Washington, D.C. So I'm not sure if I can control the slides, but I think Jamie has control of the slides. So next slide.
No, you should have control.
Oh, I should have control.
There you go, Lopez, if you see
Oh,
it.
great. Now I see it. Okay. Thank you so much. So the DC Office of Public Records was established in February of 1986 in the Office of the Secretary to review and approve agency records retention schedules, train records officers, and implementing the policies, procedures, and guidelines of managing records, et cetera, et cetera. And I have been with the agency for the past 2 years now, and I'm happy to say that we have made great strides in our records management activities in Washington, D.C. Now, my next slide, I say who is under our purview. This is something that we've had to work on. We manage the executive branch of DC government, so it's operating departments and agencies, including independent agencies of the district, which are not under the mayor's purview, the advisory neighborhood commissions, and I'll pause here just to explain the way DC is arranged. So we have a city council that is like your state legislature, and then we have advisory neighborhood commissions that are like your local city council. So each neighborhood in Washington, D.C. has an advisory neighborhood commission with commissioners who support their local areas and support issues for the public, and then also sometimes bring those issues to the council. We also have an Armory Board, Public Service Commission, and various other boards appointed by the mayor. So we manage about 92 different agencies in Washington, D.C. in the Office of Public Records. So I have this slide here, what are public records? And while some of you may know that, the DC government public records law defines it as any book, paper, map, photograph, card, tape, etc., that is created or received by an agency or unit of the district in pursuance of law or in connection with the transaction of business. And we like to share that with our agencies so that they can understand that basically most of what they do in the course of their work is a public record, and they should work with us if they want to destroy any of that, because under DC law, the records are owned by the District of Columbia. As in many states, they're just open, owned by the public. Under DC law, the records are actually owned by the government of the District of Columbia. And so they can only be destroyed under the guidance of a record schedule. And so we try to ensure that all of the agencies understand that, so that they're not saying, let me just clean out my office. You can't just clear out your office. You have to come to us and work with us to legally destroy those records. And so, as we have developed in the Office of Public Records, the agency records manager or agency director, while they're all required to have a records manager under the law, some of them don't. So it falls to the agency director to be responsible for implementing the record schedule, managing their active records according to that record schedule, and submitting documentation to our office before the destruction of records. And then our role, of course, is to set procedures for the management of records, provide guidance and support to these agencies, store and manage semi-active and inactive records, and approve record schedules, digitization projects, records management projects, and the destruction of records. I say that a lot because we must reiterate that you cannot destroy records unless they are approved by our office. So we like to reiterate that. Approval. So our office is divided into 3 separate areas: the Public Records Center, which is the area that manages records management, the DC Archives, which houses our historically valuable material, and the Library of Government Information. And I'll just explain briefly all 3. The Public Records Center, as I mentioned, is the unit that works directly with our agencies. They collect and store permanent and temporary records. We have a facility in Washington, D.C., 1300 Naylor Court, which is our facility, but we also store records with the National Archives, thanks to their support for storing records. We actually, even though we're not a state, we generate the same amount of records as a state. And so we required more space to store. But thankfully, we are building a new facility, which should be open in 2026, and it will be large enough to house our entire collection in one building and be state of the art. As a matter of fact, I can share that it is compliant with our Greener Buildings Act, which requires that new facilities built in Washington, D.C. meet a net zero requirement. So we'll be one of the first net zero archives in the nation. One of the new things that we have implemented is a digital public records center. We have acquired a digital preservation system, and we are also in the process of updating our electronic records general record schedule to cover email, social media, and other electronic records created by our agencies. And now we have a process for ingesting that material into our archive with our new digital public records center. We have actually reconfigured our public records center to now have staff dedicated to each agency. So we now have records managers who are basically liaisons with each of our agencies that will go out and visit them, help them as they prepare their records, and provide guidance. So that's one of the changes that we've made. We have about 4 people to manage our 92 agencies. So it's a lot of work, but we are there to support our agencies and help them. Once records reach their retention period, they are either destroyed or transferred into the DC Archives, which holds our historical and permanently valuable records, which are birth and death records, wills, land records, and marriage records, including wills of Alexander Graham Bell, Francis Scott Key, James Madison, Dolly Madison, Woodrow Wilson, Oliver Wendell Holmes, Frederick Douglass, and many, many, many other people, even the birth certificate for Duke Ellington. And so this is our office that makes materials available to the public. The material in the Public Records Center is only available to records managers if they need to retrieve a record. But DC Archives is open to the public. And and I'll answer that question later. I saw it pop up. So we also just released a digital archive, archives.dc.gov, which we have our death certificates available, birth certificates available, and over time, we'll make more and more of our collection available digitally for the public to use. And then finally, we have the Library of Government Information, which collects publications created by our DC government agencies. Each agency is required to submit 2 copies of each report, study, or publication that they prepare and release to the public. So we are the centralized location for all of those publications. And one of the things that we're also doing as we build our digital archive is working to make the Library of Government information available through that website as well. And so I didn't want to take too long. I know I clicked forward to their slide, but I did not want to take up too much of our time because I know we have several presentations, but I'll answer your questions later. Or should I do that now? Because I know the archives.
You can go ahead and answer Susan's question now, which
Okay.
is, other than what's expressed in 2-1714, are there any other governing authorities concerning the creation and preservation of records that you operate under? Okay, that one may be for everyone too.
Yeah. So
but
there
let's-
are, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say there are several mayor's orders that have come out since the Public Records Law was passed in 1985 that have essentially reiterated what the agencies are responsible for, and OPR's oversight of records. So there have been mayor's orders released after that kind of reiterated our role and our authority to manage public records. And as far as the specific legal authority granted over digitization projects, we have managed that as part of our records management duties. Since we have, our role is to say, okay, you can scan these documents, but you can't do anything else with the original documents unless they are approved by us. And many people are digitizing with the hope of being able to destroy their paper records. And so if you want to be able to destroy those paper records, it needs to comply with our standards. So that typically gets folks in line.
Thank you. And with that, we will move on to, and we'll go to Becky E.
Becky?
Bear.
Okay. Hi, I'm Becky Hebert with the Alabama Department of Archives and History. And I'll just say basically what I'm hearing, from the federal government, that in Alabama, we take victory in small successes and we work with what we have. We deal with a lot of attorneys. And, when we're doing our training, it's always important that you understand what the law is, because I promise you that they will look it up. There is one that says you have to actually create accurate records. One of those is related to the State and Local Records Commission, and our Appraisal Records Management section. We serve as the staff for the commission, but they are responsible with determining which records are preserved permanently. This is the one that actually really connects with, I would say, our state and local officials, is that no government official shall cause any government records to be destroyed without obtaining approval of the State or Local Government Records Commission. This is one that's very easy to understand. So then what you have to know is, well, how do the commissions implement this responsibility? And so they do that by reviewing and approving records disposition authorities. And essentially, of course, y'all are very familiar. Those are just the retention schedules. And for state agencies, we're the ones who actually do that work. And of course, we have right now approximately 175 records disposition authorities online on our website. We have a Manage Records tab on archives.alabama.gov. So these are comprehensive documents for each agency. And then for local governments, we have them for different entities like counties, municipalities, maybe local law enforcement, fire departments, boards of education, that type of thing. And it's this records disposition authority, and this is how we explain it. This is your legal authority to dispose of temporary records that meet the minimum requirement. You can keep them longer. And then, of course, it also tells them which records should be maintained permanently. So then we get into, okay, what is the implementation part of it? So for state governments, both the chair of the commission, who is the director, y'all are familiar with Steve Murray of the Department of Archives and History. He signs the Records Disposition Authority. Also, typically it is the director of the state agency signs it. So if you actually look at the language, and I'm going to read it, but it states in there, and we actually work with attorneys because they read this language very closely. So we actually had to have a back and forth to figure out what they were comfortable with and felt complied with the law. That the RDA, just like I said, constitutes authorization by the State Records Commission for the disposition of records as stipulated in this document. However, one condition of this authorization is that the agency shall submit an annual records disposition authority implementation report, and it kind of goes on. But in essence, by January 15th of each year, each state agency, district attorney, college, university must submit an annual RDA implementation report. It's January 15th for the previous fiscal year. You can see to the right, just some of the questions that we have. And so the question, right, that we are dealing with today is why? Like, why are agencies going to do what you ask them to do? And so you do have the law, but honestly, the law only gets you so far. That is our starting point. So one of the things that we do is we do post a status. Basically, it's an annual RDA compliance report. It's just a listing of all the state agencies. And it says whether or not they get a check mark of whether or not they have complied for the last 5 years. And we'll talk more about what does compliance mean. And honestly, shaming used to get you a little bit farther than it does today. And it's really the second one that is particularly important, as we've had a long-standing relationship with the examiners of public accounts. We actually have a representative on our State Records Commission. And so state agencies can be cited by the examiners of public accounts for either not having a records disposition authority or for not submitting their annual RDA implementation report. So I've had quite a few phone calls with state agencies who said, oh, maybe it's the board who manages it, maybe it's the director, maybe it's the person in finance who has talked to someone down the line and said, hey, we got cited, we need to call the archives and figure out what this is. So it's the examiners who are accessing this compliance log, and that really helps us out. And that is what we do. I think we are all about, we have a little bit of the law to support us, but we are about collaboration and partnership. And so in the annual RDA implementation report, we have to make sure that it is not too burdensome, because what I can promise you about the records officers who are appointed is that records management is not their responsibility. This is something they've been tasked with. So on occasion, we have directors fill it out, attorneys fill it out, but we also have administrative assistants and inspectors, people who know absolutely nothing about records. And so we tried to figure out, right, and try to determine that, this is really a tool for us to connect with agencies. And with limited staff, all of my staff, we work with both state agencies and local governments. And this is a good time of year for us to be able to connect with them. So when we're sending out the reminders, what kind of bounce backs do we get? Are the people still there? Do they know we exist? Do they know that there is a records disposition authority? And understanding that sometimes the person who's answering the questions is not the person, right, that we need to be talking to. So we kind of had like a multiple stage process for, what compliance is. So for part of the compliance, right, it's really about, did you submit the report? And I really, I guess, should go backwards. Did you submit the report? And if you said you destroyed records, did you submit the destruction logs to us? That's really what we have authority over. And a small example is we had a licensing board who, said they destroyed records, and they submitted a one-page document that literally had tally marks on it that said how often their recycling bins had been picked up. No information about what records were destroyed or anything. Well, we gave them their checkbox, right? That's what they're looking for. But then we were able to go in, we were able to talk to them about, hey, this is how you document destruction. This is why you do it. This is what a records management program is. Okay, what about your permanent records? And so permanent records are a little bit tricky, right? Because we all have to work with the code, and some of us have been more blessed with more code than others of us. So the State Records Commission and local does have the authority on which records are permanent. and the agencies must preserve those records. But this is why I always remind people, you better make sure you go in and read your code, because if not, agencies will read it for you. And, I know that I had kind of made this assumption because you're kind of glancing over things, you read material all day. And I was like, no, agencies are required to transfer materials to the archives, their records. That is actually not the case. Our code actually says may transfer records. So in our managing records guide, we actually had extensive discussions about this. We used the word should. We decided that was, in that way implies it's something you should do. But we don't actually have the authority to compel it. But we do tie the transmittal of certain permanent records to the annual RDA implementation report. And then that way it makes it seem like a requirement, even though it's not really. And we're trying to focus more than anything these past few years, and we've been highly successful, is helping people understand electronic records are records too. Give us the records that are already public. So we found, especially in communications departments, even your newsletters and annual reports, communications staff turnover all the time, and their material gets completely lost. So by collecting it every year, we're making sure those meeting minutes, and which you don't have to worry about as much, but some of the other stuff is being preserved, which is very basic. Like I said, newsletters and annual reports and a lot of publications, rosters, organizational charts, but just simple things. And then sometimes you get things that are more substantial. Now, I talked about the records disposition authorities, and that is also one of our tools because they are required to create those. And because we work with agencies comprehensively, which means we can only work with 5 to 6 agencies a year, but we go in and we actually conduct record surveys with every section of the agency. We talk to them about processes. We develop relationships with them. And we have found that this has been very productive. And even though I would say it's limited in scope, when they come out of it, they have this very positive relationship and this comprehensive document. And so it used to be we would have the agencies do more of the work, but by having us do those surveys, create memos, comprehensively describe the records, that we really end up with great result, even if the documents don't get to be updated that much. And what we've also found is we've had some success while we're working on the RDAs where we get to talk about the transmittal of permanent records. So we've had some success recently with the courts on working on memorandum of agreements where we get to talk a little bit about, okay, maybe what are your concerns? And they're like, we really want to transfer these to you, but we actually make a lot of money on these records. So can you not provide access for 10 years? Or even working with the Secretary of State, we actually had success in getting them to transfer the actual, voter registration database. Now it's not going to be open for, I think, about 75 years, but it's all about creating those small victories, making sure those records are preserved, making sure they're there. Of course, memorandum of agreements, they have to have an expiration date, but all the records that were transferred under it still apply to that same agreement, and then hopefully we'll be able to renew those. But we've had some success with those agreements. Local governments, quickly, they're a little different. They submit destruction notices to us and receive a letter of eligibility before destroying records. We've discussed getting rid of this because, again, we have such limited staff time, but it really is our opportunity to work with those local governments, make them aware of who we are. And it's all about opening doors and building relationships. That's really the tools that we have. We actually work with them to preserve the records in their own communities. And for local governments, they often see it as protection because if they get requests, they have this document from the archives that says, hey, we were legally allowed to destroy these records. They also can be cited by the examiners, more so the counties than the municipalities. But also we have some relationships like with the Department of Education, and they asked us to get their local superintendent to sign the destruction notices. So we're happy to listen to our partners about what they want. And again, our focus is always on maintaining that contact because we just don't have the staff time to go out, do the inspections. And the reality is they don't have the resources to actually have records officers. So we have to work with people who we always say it's like 5% of their job, if that. So what are the victories, what are the successes that we can get with that, with the limited opportunities? And it's always about building those. And we recently created 2 guides, Managing Local Records and Managing State Records in Alabama, and really just breaking it down into, what are your basic obligations? Who do you contact? What do you do? What are the regulations? And just something that's very easy to hand out. It's also available on our website. And we're even working on creating a more condensed version that can be distributed to every state employee. So, like I said, we do have some support in the law behind us. But it's really about those relationships that we built, and really more about the other people who have more influence than we do, and how can we help them? And it's by helping the agencies that in the end we get that compliance. So that's sort of an overview. Obviously, there's a lot more to it, but it gives you a general sense of oversight in Alabama. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you all so much. There are 1 or 2 questions that have come in. I'll just kind of kick it off. Evangela had asked, what is the process or what actions do you all take in cases of erroneous destructions? Anyone can address.
So at the Alabama Archives, it's pretty simple. We don't really have any real enforcement authority. So what we do is we just submit a report to the relevant commission. So we talk to them about maybe making sure they document the incident. If they call us in time, right, we try to train them like, hey, if you have disasters happen, we're most worried about these permanent records. So let's put our priorities there. And basically we just document it and submit a report to the Local Government Records Commission. And part of that report, what we are asking of them is, again, we're always focusing on the future. What are you trying to do to mitigate that disaster? And most of the time, the people who are reporting to us, it was accidental destruction. So it's the toilet overflow, some kind of leak in the roof. The people who are intentionally destroying records are not aware of it. They're not going to report anything to us, and we're not going to know about it. But if we do have someone in our archives who reads newspapers and collects those, so they will send us, if there are stories in the newspaper, and we will make phone calls and say, hey, were you aware? And so, you make those awkward cold calls, but also just let them know, like, again, you're just here to help them. You're here to move forward. You're not here to get them in trouble.
Great. Anyone else?
We actually borrowed NARA's unauthorized destruction report form here in DC, where we simply, ask them to report it, give us the conditions under which the records were erroneously destroyed, and then we work with them to develop a process to have that no longer happen. We do have enforcement authority under the public records law, but it's that we would be able to take civil action, but that seems pretty dramatic. So in all possibilities, we would try to just work with agencies to ensure that it doesn't happen again, and we err on the side of, we think it was unintentional.
We at NARA, we get a lot of interest in our unauthorized disposition cases from the public special interest groups. We actually have a web page where we actually list those cases by agency, but the open and closed letters, because there is such interest in that. So it is something that we do spend a lot of time tracking.
Great, thank you. And then Becky, you touched on this quite a bit at the end of your presentation about developing relationships and really kind of fostering people along, which I think is great. Do you others want to kind of comment on what steps you take to ensure that agencies comply with your statutes and rules? And then on that as well, how do you handle non-compliance with an agency?
Well, we actually just started, thanks to our new records management team, which are on the line. So shout out to Ali. They're doing what we call Records Management Wednesdays, where we're going to have workshops every second Wednesday of the month to try to teach agencies about records management policies and the things that they can do to better manage their records. We try to ensure that they just staying in contact with them to ensure that they comply with the public records law. There are a lot of people around DC watching what the agencies are doing. So they tend to follow policies because God forbid someone finds out that they don't. They'll be in front of the council and they'll be in the newspaper. And with our tricky relationship with the federal government, no one wants to be in the spotlight. So that typically brings people in line.
I'll just say, in addition to the UD process, when we do our inspections, the agencies are put on the plans of corrective action, and they are, expected to complete those. Like you mentioned, shoulds and musts, and if there's a must in our findings and recommendation based on the regs, they do have to fix those, and we do track and we make agencies report to us, twice a year on their status of how they're doing in completing the findings we found in our inspection report. So we track those through completion.
Great. Any of you all want to talk a little bit more about any regular training programs or materials and how often it's given and how you target those potential attendees?
I mean, I'll just say for us, and just like a lot of people, and this really came out of COVID, but we just do a lot of online training because we find, especially in local governments, they don't have the resources to travel. And as much as we'd love to go on site visits, we don't have the resources to be out of the office that much. And so, again, on our Managed Records webpage, we have training opportunities. And so we always make sure there's at least one local, one college university, and one state agency training. And it could be in the next couple of months. And we just base it on how many people are signing up is how frequently we have it. We do offer site visits, or we encourage, especially local governments, like, hey, be a host site. So, maybe in the south of the state, we had a local law enforcement office who were like, hey, I'm going to host all the other small municipalities and have all the local law enforcement, and we'll do a specialized training for them. We've looked at doing a lot of videos, but, that takes up a lot of time, and we've just found that the personal contact is better. So we do a lot of phone calls too, just walking people through the questions.
And at DARA, in our Office of Chief Records Officer, we do have a records management training program. It's a pretty robust program where we do make training available to all of the agencies to take advantage of. So there's course information where they can create their own for their own staff and stuff that we provide to them. So we do, and we're constantly looking at new content for our training program. So there is a fair amount of training out there, and a lot of it's on our webpage.
And we developed a records management handbook. We also developed the records manager certification program, which we've linked to access to our tools and systems. So if you're in a certified records manager, you can't have access to the digital record center, to try to encourage them to take it. And like I said, we do have the records management workshop series. We also try to, as best we can, visit the agencies and have one-on-one talks with the records managers to see what support they need, how we can help them, how we can be a better support to them. So we do the one-on-one, but we also have the online trainings that we then make available on our internal channel so that the records managers can go back to.
Great. Thank you. Well, and I know we're coming close to the end, but I just wanted to ask one final question, kind of end on a good note. What's your greatest success story? Anyone like to share?
I mean, go ahead, Melissa.
Oh, I was just taking a breath. I was going to let you go.
I would say, one of our great success stories, and he would be very happy for me to share, is that we actually had from the Secretary of State's office. He was actually represented on our State Records Commission, but he's very passionate about what we do, and he was the chief of staff. So while he was there, he actually gave us funds to hire an archivist to go work in his office, which is very rare for us, and actually work with them on cleaning up their electronic records. So it varied from, like, the elections office had like 200 to 300 different file folders, and we were able to consolidate that structure and work with them. They're the ones who did the work in the end, right? We're just guiding them. Or every time a new finance officer would come in, they would create a new drive because they didn't understand what was going on before. So we were able to consolidate it, work with them on the transfer of like 6 different databases. And so, just having someone who is interested, you work with them while they're in office and see how much you can accomplish. So that was a huge success for us.
That's great.
And I'll say our huge success is actually the new building that I mentioned that we
Absolutely.
are about to construct. It has been 20 years in the making. Our facility was at capacity in the late 90s, and they've been working to get a new facility since the early 2000s. And we are a week away from starting construction on this new building. And if you knew what we had to go through to get here.
I do, Lopez, I do.
It has been a journey.
Yes.
So that is amazing.
And just from an oversight perspective, I'll say one of our successes, and actually it's almost an annual one, is like for our annual reporting and our records management self-assessment, those things, we get almost 98% compliance from all the federal agencies. Almost everyone participates every year, which is great that we get, almost 300 agencies giving us data about how, what the status is of the records management program. That allows us to sort of track and see, how are we doing, right? Are we making progress? Are we seeing that type of progress, whether it's email or for electronic records or just the state of their records management programs as a whole. So we're
That's
excited
phenomenal.
that that's good participation.
Wonderful. Well, great. Well, I want to thank you all again, Dawn, Karen, Evangela, Lopez, and Becky. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives and your stories with us. Really appreciate it. I don't see any other questions in the chat, but by all means, we can always keep the conversation going on the communities and CoSA board or through just emails with one another. Thank you, Meg, too, for fostering this. And Lisa, I'll turn it over to you to talk about our upcoming programs.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, everyone, for participating today. And so, like Jamie said, if you have more questions, we'll try and catch them here before we end. But if you liked this webinar, watch for the ones we have coming up. We've got 3 for our member webinar, and our October one, which is our State Archive Spotlight, is always exciting because that's where we get to go into a little more depth about 2 of our archives and what their programs are like. So I hope you'll join us for that. We also have an upcoming SERI webinar, taking a bite out of Bit Curator. So if you're interested in electronic records, these are great webinars to check out as well. And then we have our vendor shop talks. Nobody likes to talk to the vendors because you think you're always going to get a sales talk. But we actually have an arrangement with our sponsors where they can do an information forward presentation to our members. And it's a great way to learn about what they can provide without feeling like, oh gosh, I'm going to have to tell them I don't have any money in the budget. So check those out. As always, there's lots of ways to communicate with CoSA, and we hope you'll take advantage of most of them. None of this is possible without our funders. We have grants from the Mellon Foundation, from IMLS, and of course, our sponsors make a lot of things possible. So we appreciate our work with everyone. And as you exit today, you'll find a brief evaluation, I believe. If you do, please take a moment and answer it. It really does help our education committee as they move forward on their journey, coming up with topics and things. And to echo what Meg said, if there's a topic you'd like to hear, please reach out to CoSA, please reach out to Meg. Let us know. We'd be glad to schedule some more CoSA-NARA webinars and bring the 2 sides together. So thank you all for joining us today. Jamie, Meg, all the participants, all the presenters, we hope we will see you at the next CoSA webinar, CoSA-NARA webinar, SERI webinar. We just hope to see you soon. And don't forget, we're going to be in St. Louis in September. So we hope to see you there. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone. That was really interesting. I loved hearing about